Well, good morning, Catherine.
Good morning.
And hi, John. Glad to see you with us.
Good morning.
Hi, Jennifer. Mr. Vizdos, welcome aboard.
Good morning from Phoenix today.
That's an early rise and shine.
Hey, I get double the time here. I get a 12-hour day or a 16-hour day, right?
Woohoo.
Only working half days. What the heck?
Well, good morning, Mr. Edelman. Welcome aboard.
Good morning. How are you?
Good. All right. According to Verizon time, we're at 9 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to Commonwealth Agency Agile Conference number 8. I hope your summer went well and that your fall is starting off on the right foot or left foot if that's your better side, or if you're in a marching band. Our topic today, change management and Agile, is open to some interpretation. Change management is one of those phrases that has different meanings depending on who you're talking to. But here's the one thing that is true. Precisely 0 of those meanings could be construed as exciting by anyone. So since you're here in spite of that, I hope that you won't think it too strange to me to say that I think we have an exciting morning planned. Before we get into that agenda, though, let me remind you that if you have tech support issues, David Crichton is from IT, and he's here to help. If you run into technical difficulties, kind of trouble this morning, then please chat or email with David, and he'll get it sorted out for you if there is any sorting that can be done. Now, on to the agenda for the morning. We're going to start today with a recap of the results of a survey that we sent out 4 weeks ago. Then Ted Henline is going to take over for an hour to tell us just what change management is, and he'll tell us why we should never deliver Agile projects without it. Then we'll take a short break, and after the break, we have a panel lined up to answer your questions about change management and Agile, or whatever else you want to talk about. Then we'll wrap up the morning with our retrospective. And speaking of that retrospective, Elizabeth's going to take a moment now to get us started on that way early. So, Elizabeth.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen. Good morning and welcome to everybody. So, being good Agilists and practitioners, we will have a retrospective at the end of this conference. And the purpose is to continually improve the conference. So what we're going to ask you to do is, as you go through today's conference this morning, be thinking about and capturing your thoughts, and trying to keep with the Halloween theme. If you found something that was really great and insightful and we want to keep doing it, that's a treat. So we'll have a Jamboard available for you to capture a sticky note there. And conversely, if there are things that you think the conference could be improved around, or thoughts for the future, please include those on the I'm calling the trick side. So in your chat for this meeting, you should be seeing a link to the Jamboard. That link will also be sent during the break time and just before our retrospective at the end of the conference. And if for some reason, and there may be good reasons why a number of you can't get to the Jamboard, you can just type in your thoughts in the chat, and myself and my cohorts, Barbara and David will be monitoring that and capturing that on the Jamboard for you. So, any questions right now?
Elizabeth, I threw out there, I think everyone's probably very capable of clicking on the link, but I didn't know if it would be advantageous just to click through the slides, through the boards, and just show everyone through presentation.
Sure, we'll do that.
It's pretty standard. It's just, I thought it might be helpful. Thanks.
Yeah.
Coming right up.
All right. There you go. And what you'll see is the first two slides are for your treats, the things you want to keep up. And I put one little example there. I've already thought of something that I really liked. And if you keep on sliding through, you'll get to our spooky, the things that we're perhaps we don't want to continue doing. And if you look to the left-hand side, you see these little icons, little gadgets you can pull over to do a text box or do a sticky note. And you just drag it over and start typing. And I would say if you do use the chat, you might just preface it with the word trick or treat, just so we're clear that we know what category you want it to be in. All right, so we look forward to hearing people's thoughts at the end of the conference, and it will be time boxed. So see you on the flip side.
Yeah,
Thanks, Stephen.
Absolutely. I think what we learned from the last conference is that it's really been helpful for people to be able to make notes on the retrospective board as they occur to them throughout the morning. So keep that Jamboard up on the side, and we'll take a look at it at the end of the day. All right, now let's get back to the presentation here. So before we get started into this, want to ask you all a question, sort of clarify where we're going with this morning. What change management are we talking about? Is it raking leaves in the fall? Is it the collection of policies and procedures around software and hardware releases and updates that are required by SEC 501? Is it a systematic approach to prepare, support, and help individuals, teams, and organizations through organizational or other change? Or is it, in Formula One racing, the process of making pit stop tire changes the most efficient possible? Now, there is a poll. If you'll click on the little triangle, square, and circle symbol in the lower right-hand corner there and go to polls, I have launched a poll with this that will allow you to chime in on what it is that we're actually talking about this morning. All right, we've got 22 votes so far. I'll leave the poll open for another 12 seconds. And that takes care of that. So looks like 21 of you voted for item answer C. We did have a couple of votes for, well, 4 for answer B. The correct answer, of course, is C. What we're talking about today, that systematic approach to support organizational or other change. For all you Formula One fans, we'll try to catch another time. In the meanwhile, we do have a few minutes left to talk about our survey results. So on to the survey. What you told us. We had about 30 people respond to our survey on change management over the last 4 weeks. And we typically have between 50 and 60 folks at this conference. So 30 is a huge percentage of respondents. And I want to thank you all for taking the time to do that. And for giving us this early view of CM in the Commonwealth. Now, those 30 responses came from a dozen different agencies, including a couple that we haven't seen at an Agile conference before. So welcome aboard. First question in the survey, does your agency practice any form of change management for projects? And the overwhelming answer was, well, yes, or maybe. And then, does your agency use a particular tool to track change management? And if so, what is it? The big response here was, I don't know, unknown or no. Next question, who on your team is typically responsible for change management? We got a whole lot more varied responses to this one, though I will tell you that the big answer, the popular answer was still, I don't know, unknown, with about a third of respondents saying that. Do any Agile teams in your agency track change management tasks as part of their backlog? And the answer here, maybe or no, got the majority of the votes. And then, what change management methodology does your agency use, if any? And the big answer here was, I don't know. So there you have it. A whole lot of unknown or not sure or I don't know. Some confusion, I'm sure, about the topic. Lots of different roles involved and a whole lot of, well, maybe we do that. All of that tells me that we are absolutely doing the right thing, talking about change management today. And that will lead us right into our first presentation of the morning. Change management, never deliver Agile projects without it. Ted Hanline has been here at the VSP for how long, Ted? 3 years? Has it been that long?
Yep, 4 years now.
Yeah. He comes to us with a Bachelor of Science in Ocean Engineering, Master's in Math and Education, 48 years as a teacher of math and German. And I'll tell you, neither of those things is important at the state police. So thanks anyway, Ted. What we really care about, aside from the fact that he's been married 40 years, has a whole lot of grandkids out there, is that he is a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt, ProSci Certified Change Manager, ASQ Certified Quality Manager, Quality Engineer, Reliability Engineer, and Certified Government Financial Manager. Served with the Coast Guard for 24 years. Has walked on fire twice. Probably not while playing trumpet at the same time, but I don't know. Anyway, Ted, take it away. We're glad to have you this morning. Welcome.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. As I take over presenting, I'd ask everybody to open the link that I sent last night to your to a survey that I sent out. We'll be using that survey in a couple of different places during the presentation that I am going to share with you today. So, Stephen, any problems with seeing the slide here?
Nope, looks good.
Okay, so thank you all for attending today and welcome. We'll start right off with something that we should consider as Agile practitioners. The industry data shows, and this is from 2022, that 49% of all Agile project deliveries experience challenges with deployment across the impacted working groups. So the statistical evidence out there across the industry is, hey, we're not doing this as well as we could do, that there's opportunities for improvement. I want to just share real quick that I will be presenting a industry survey, if you will, a survey of what the experts say out there. I myself do not claim to be an expert. I've just been doing change management combined with business process management, process engineering, Six Sigma, lean work for about the past 20 years. So where I'm presenting strictly my opinion, this little guy's going to show up. Okay. Otherwise, I will have sources for my slides down in the small print on each slide. Okay. I just want to share with you that I do have Agile experience in a previous career. I spent time in the Agile environment, both as a product owner, a Scrum member, and a Can Scrum member. So I do have Agile experience behind me. And as Steve shared, I'm a certified change manager from PROCI, is the organization that I use. Before we get started, I want to give you a personal story, personal insights into a change management that didn't occur and some really strange behavior that happened. And this was during my 24 years in the Coast Guard. I was a officer on a Coast Guard cutter down in Galveston, Texas. And if you take a look at this picture, there's something wrong with it. And the thing that's wrong with it is that this Coast Guard cutter is still tied up at the dock. It hasn't left. And that's the end result of what happened when we paid no attention to a significant change that we were imposing on our teams. When I first arrived in 1976, our cutter, the Valiant, was spending 1 week out doing search and rescue humanitarian missions. Everybody loved those missions. When you save somebody, you got good PR, newspaper, and all of that kind of good stuff. The community patted you on the back, and then we were in for 3 weeks. So for married folks with children, etc., you were only away 1 week out of the month. The military, knowing that scheduling is really crazy, this was a really, really nice gig, if you will. And then in the end of 1976, beginning of 77, all of a sudden we changed, got word from on high that we're going to go out and do drug enforcement and law enforcement work. And we're not going to do it in the Gulf of Mexico, up around the Galveston, Mobile, New Orleans area, where we can get home relatively quick. We're going to go all the way down to the Yucatan Peninsula, and we're going to start interdicting drugs down there as close to the source as possible. So we went from a 1 week out, 3 weeks in, 2 weeks out, 1 week in. And needless to say, this was a huge change for the entire team. And it came back from came down from the top leadership in the Coast Guard, being a military organization. The expectation was they would tell us how high to jump, and on the way up, they would tell us to jump, and we would ask how high. What was not planned was the reaction of the crew. So the first time we were getting ready to go out on a patrol, the captain's up on the bridge. He calls down, take in 1, take in 3, take in 4, engines ahead 1/4, spring off of 2. And that's the various lines. Well, all of a sudden, instead of the ship moving, we hear this sound going on, and we get the frantic call from the engine room, all stop. And somebody had drilled a hole in a hydraulic line going down to the engine room from the bridge. So needless to say, we weren't going anywhere that day. That hole was fixed within a day, no problem, but we weren't leaving that day. So the next day, excuse me, we get ready to go again, take in 1, take in 3, take in 4, ahead 1/4, spring off of 2, and we get this frantic call from the engine room saying, all stop, all stop. and come to find out somebody had put deck acid in the aluminum governor, and the governor controls the engine speed going back to the reduction gear. A big deal. So we had to obviously not go anywhere. We had to go into emergency supply, replace the aluminum governor, and now we're tied up for an additional 3 days. So we're 4 days now tied up when we're supposed to be out underway. We get that fixed. We're up on the bridge, take in 1, take in 3, take in 4, and 1/4, spring off of 2. And again, we get massive, really quick call from the engine room because of this massive noise coming from the rear of the ship. And come to find out, somebody had thrown bolts into the reduction gear. The reduction gear on our ship were 6 feet tall. There were a total of 12 gears that were mished into that main reduction gear, and it had done a good job in messing them up, to put it simply. And the access to the reduction gear was from a locked controlled access portal, and there was a safety plate underneath there. So whoever did this knew what they were doing to bypass the safety plate. Well, reduction gears are manufactured to less than 1/10,000th of an inch variation. Obviously, a bolt would mess that up. So it now took an entire week for someone to come in and Dremel tool all of the dings out of all of the various gears that were meshed in there. So now, instead of being out underway, we are 9 days sitting at the dock waiting to get this fixed. Finally, we got it fixed, and we're getting ready to go to depart. And one of my deck crew comes up and tells me, sorry, he can't leave because his wife, who he just married 3 weeks ago, has just left with everything. And that was kind of a shocker. But what was a bigger shocker was that he also brought a gallon Ziploc bag aboard that had clear illegal substances in it, marijuana to be a fact. And he was then immediately discharged, dishonorably discharged, sent home. So I share that story because in an environment where the culture was supposed to be, we tell you to jump and you tell us how high, failure to embrace change management can cause what I call aberrant behavior. And some of it can be really, really expensive, and some of it can be really, really bad. So probably not going to happen in an agile world, but it certainly has the potential for people reacting very strangely in ways you don't expect. So given that story, let's go on then. My agenda is just to talk about why should we, as Agile practitioners, add effective change management, a brief review of Agile methodologies for alignment, and then a review of the Agile management methodologies and change assessment tools. The difficulty in the Agile world is in the change management world, there is no such thing as a change management manifesto that we can go back to. And as a result, there are multiple change management methodologies. So I'm just going to do a brief review of those for you so you're aware of them, at least by name and just a little bit of detail. Then I'm going to talk about the one that I personally am certified in and find to be very user-friendly and very adaptable, ProC, and we'll talk more about that. And then we'll just kind of try to answer the question, where does change management fit into Agile iterations and ceremonies? What kind of change resistance could you see? What are the signals that will help you understand answers to the question of, has the user group adapted or adopted the change? And then finally, next steps and any questions and answers. So let's go right into then the why should we. So there's evidence out there from McKinsey 2019 that's not looking very positive. Only 14% of digital transformation succeed. When we look at more recent data from 2022, most common reasons, you'll see the two that blew up there are firmly anchored in ineffective change management. So this is very recent data, and you can see that of the 4 most common reasons, 2 of them clearly are about change management from the user group or the impactor group perspective. There is a heavy cost to not paying attention to it in terms of what we call employee change fatigue, which results in decreased engagement and decreased commitment to whatever the vision is going to be. And oftentimes this happens so often that the organization develops a legacy or reputation for poor implementation that is very, very difficult to overcome. We use up employees' goodwill. There's a heavy cost in people. Often the people will just vote with their feet and they'll leave, and we won't know in advance, and all of a sudden they're gone. Recent data from Change First, a company that's very active in the change management perspective, almost 50% of your staff experience high levels of change fatigue. And generally, if you're not looking for it, you won't see it, you won't understand it. This leads to very superficial engagement with the change, and the evidence shows out there that of those who accept the change, and that's only about 50%, only about 50% are then committed to it. So out of your total population of a user group, obviously depending on size, you only got 25% of them, from what the industry data shows, that are committed to ensuring the success of that change, whatever it is you happen to do. Those are really awful statistics from a change management perspective. When you take a look at the cost of poor change implementation, basically we have solution quality. We do everything we can to have the right solution that fit the business need. We ensure that we have the right processes and the structure that supports the change, that we have the right sequence and cost and all of those things. But we don't pay a whole lot of attention to the change management because, buying and building should be pretty straightforward. Aligning should be straightforward. Implementation rollout should be straightforward. But what about change management? What's happening with the impacted group? What's happening with the people that are impacted this? This is called the value gap. When you start looking at the industry articles and blogs, et cetera, about change managers working in the Agile space, they often talk about this thing called the change management value gap. And this is distinctly different from IT code configuration change management. We need to understand that as Agile practitioners, we deal with changing code the vast majority of our time. We're not talking about changing code here. We're talking about causing disruption to the user group, to the impacted group. And this is really important for Agile practitioners to develop. We're really comfortable in this delivering incremental value. Every iteration, we're doing something new, we're changing something, we're tweaking something. Incremental change to deliver value is the heart of Agile. And therefore, Agile practitioners with around the specific solution or project are typically very far down the change journey, and because of the methodology we're working in. But if we look at the impacted group, their comfort zone is generally keep things the same and stable. I'm ready and committed to make things better is typically a secondary mindset for most user groups, and they have to be brought there. And the change journey that the Agile team on to deliver value is not the same as the one for the impacted group if they're on one at all. And therefore, what we see as incremental change becomes change fatigue if we don't effectively and intentionally manage it. And what we see as incremental value, the user groups quickly see as disruption. And disruption leads to resistance. And that's what we as Agile practitioners need to understand, the culture outside of the culture of our Agile team, our Agile methodology, and our need and desire to deliver incremental value as defined by the product owner. So let's not beat this dead horse anymore. I mean, the data is clearly out there. We've got lots of opportunity to do things better in the change world. And let's go right straight to one of the experts, Tom Creasy. He is ProC's Chief Innovation Officer, and he says the need for effective change management is arguably increased in Agile because of the iterative nature, the amount of churn created, and its impact on our people and our culture. Let's just take a real quick review of Agile so that you all understand where I'm coming from, so that we're aligned here. Agile, from my perspective, is an iterative application development process. Feedback continuously gathered from stakeholders and users. Lots of different methods that we can use. It has the practice has iterations that have well-defined ceremonies, and we offer a framework where we do communicate and reflect through retrospectives on past work and where can we improve and make things better. So when I talk Agile, this is my experience. I've been in the Scrum and I've been in the Kanban Scrum. I have not worked in the others, and I've had multiple roles in that in my Agile background. There are 3 types of Agile change, and if you'll go ahead and open the survey link and look at question number 1, there is the organizational change, where they go from historical waterfall to the new iterative Agile methodology, that big culture organizational change. There's also change around organizations trying to figure out how to use Agile more effectively and experiencing the naturally changed stories, et cetera, et cetera. And then there is the change that is being experienced by the user groups when an Agile team delivers an incremental value and go ahead and deploys it. So what I would like you to do is, on that first survey question, just go in and pick and all of that apply. Which one of these are you experiencing now? And I will pop out of my slideshow and bring up the responses then. And while you're there, also look at question number 2 and go ahead and answer question number 2 at the same time. Let's take 30 more seconds. Let me refresh this. It might not be refreshing.
Ted, is it possible to post that link in the chat?
All right, I'll give you just a little more time. So what I see from the first survey, from the limited number of responses that I'm getting for whatever reason, that it seems the all 3 types of change are being experienced, with potentially the biggest change being experienced is actual working within the Agile methodology and the experiencing the naturally changing and improving stories. And when I look at the second question, it looks like again, all 3 are being experienced, but the biggest challenge is the one of moving from a historically waterfall project into the new iterative Agile methodology. So let's go back then to the slideshow.
Hey, Ted,
yeah.
Can you hear me? This is Dave Crichton. Ariel mentioned that we might need to complete the survey before you see results.
Okay.
Just a thought. So we'd have to answer all the questions and then complete the survey. So you might want to come back to it. Just a thought.
Okay. So I do have another question 3 coming up, which I would like people to look at. And basically what I'm interested in getting information on is which of these change challenges resonate with you concerning your organization's agile deployment. So this is question number 3. If you would go ahead and answer that and pick the ones that apply. Yes, no, or not sure. Let me refresh this again. I'll give you a couple of seconds. Okay, now it seems to be refreshing.
Yeah, what happened, Ted, is that since the questions are required, we can't just answer one and then submit it. We have to answer them all.
Oh, okay.
So it's
yes, you're right, because you got to submit. Very good. My apologies. So go ahead and go all the way down and then hit submit. Sorry about that, folks. We'll take another 30 seconds. All right, well, while you're continuing that, I'm going to go back to the slideshow, and then at the end, I'll come back and review your responses on everything here so we can we'll not lose time. We'll continue on. So keep answering those surveys as you go. If you can do that in the background, that'd be great. And again, my apologies for not setting up the survey so that would function better. So let's take a look at the scope of change management methodologies that are out there. So again, let's be clear what we mean on change management. It's a process. There's implementation required, there's monitoring required, and we want to see physical change. We want to see change happen, and there are physical change keys and levers and indicators that we can get. Change management is 4 core principles: understand, plan, implement, and communicate the change. And the purpose of of change management as a concept is implement strategies that enable people to personally adapt and then adopt in the most painless and sustainable way a new change, a change in their behavior. There are many results that people will have based on the change that's coming. It's ironic when you ask people, most of them will tell you they don't mind change. I just don't want to go through it. The challenge we have is that every one of these reactions is probable. You won't know in advance for sure how any specific people or group react. People will possibly cycle through these feelings multiple times. It's not linear. And while we generally know where people will, as a group, go, it is not individually predictable, and that's the big challenge that we have with the concept of an effective change management system and strategy. There are multiple change management methodologies. As I said, there is no such thing as a change manifesto. And this comes from Nathan Altana, February 2022. And I just want to go through it so you have at least a awareness level of the variety of methodologies that you could find if you did some research on it. And an old adage that I've used many, many times, that all models are flawed, some are useful. The degrees of usefulness of some of these is arguable, but this is what's out in the industry, so I'm going to give you a review. The first one is Kotter's 8 change model. It has very nicely defined phases, if you will, and it has some tools on it. It has some assessment stuff on it, not as meaty as a practitioner in change management would want. And the biggest challenge that I find with this is that it assumes that change is a linear journey, which we know for a fact it isn't. But it does have a fairly good toolbox that you could use if you have experience in it and a experienced change manager type on your team. Then there's the other extreme, Lewin's change management template: unfreeze, change, and refreeze. As a change management practitioner, I find this incredibly unuseful, because I don't know what to do with these. There's no tools behind it, no techniques. It's very nicely theoretical, but very difficult to actually use this as your strategy to do effective change management activities. There's also McKinsey's 7 change management model framework, 7 S's, very well structured, has a fairly extensive tools and technology technique support underneath it. I find this most often implemented in waterfall projects because it does, again, imply a linear process from strategy all the way through. It does have its uses and its value. And then there's the Lean Management Plan, Do, Check, Act. This is generally promoted as a technique for a team to internally drive changes that they can control. It is sequential, and it does have an iterative nature to it. However, it does imply that we will linearly go through Plan, Do, Check, Act, and then have another integration of doing it again. And there is some disconnect when we are now talking getting out of the world of implementing a solution to implementing change in people's behavior. So it does have some limitations. And then Kaizen, continuous improvement model, that comes out of the Lean Six Sigma world, and it is a very intensive, generally requires heavy facilitation of a large stakeholder group of people coming together to work on solving and implementing a solution that theoretically can be implemented within 3 to 4 weeks. A very effective method, but it's kind of a mini waterfall in itself. And again, it doesn't allow for a natural understanding of the taking into consideration the behavior changes on the impact user group. LaMarche has a nice phased program: identify, prepare, plan, implement, sustain, and it has nice buckets underneath where he defines the concepts. Again, limited on tools and techniques, and again, an implied linearity, which we know is not actual when it comes to people. The model that I personally am trained and certified in is the ADKAR change model. It comes from ProC. It has a linear roadmap from awareness to desire to knowledge to ability to reinforcement, but it also stresses the iterative nature of having to go back and review and re-deliver and revise based on consistent assessing of where people are. I find this one very effective, and that's one that I use all the time. Then there's this Mauer's 3 levels of resistance. It's not so much a change management model as kind of a tool to speak about and communicate what the signals of the user group are telling you, and everything from I don't get it, which is kind of a mental thing, all the way down to I don't like you because I don't trust you anymore. It has some value as a communication tool, talking about, you know, your assessment of what's going on. This is what it means. This is where they are. I do not find this tool very helpful at all as a practitioner. And then there is some tools out there that are very strongly supported by software. Change First is probably the biggest and most well-known globally. If you're in a position where you can buy a software application for your change team, this is one that is very effective, has nice phases. It does kind of, again, imply a linear approach. However, it does inside it, when you read it and explore it, you'll find that they do understand and emphasize the iterative nature of change as good tools, software tools, techniques that are reusable, templates, those kind of things. But it's an application you have to purchase. And then there's some models to understand where in the world are we in the change. There's a Satter model of change, and basically what it's saying is, when a change is implemented, leadership and others expect the red dashed line to occur, and what actually happens is the orange shaded chaos and performance degrading over time, etc. It is a helpful model. You'll hear a lot of people talk about it. And in a similar vein, the Kubler-Ross change curve. This is one that you probably have heard about, people talking about tragedy and responding to tragedy, getting through it, loss of life, a loss of job, big emotional things. And this one is a good communication tool and helps you understand where a group is. But both of these models assume that at some point in time we'll get to the happy place, and that's just not so. We will have individuals that never get to the happy place. And neither of these models help you to understand that, as part of the model. It's something that you end up being surprised by and expected. Fisher has taken the Kubler-Ross and put more indicators on it that are helpful to actually explain and understand what you're seeing in your user group. Bridges has a transition model that talks about similar emotional expressions. The problem with both of these is that you better have an assessment system underneath it to understand these signals. I find Fisher's is a little more useful than Bridges, because Bridges assumes that everything in the endings, those are all equal weighted and an equal expression of where they are in the change journey, and we know that's just not so. And it doesn't help you a lot to figure out how do we counter these signals. And then there's some that are cultural. I worked 14 years in an organization that basically the cultural norm was every 6 months we're changing. And what they fail to understand is that change fatigue does not equal being more effective or more efficient. And then for some groups, it's just a miracle. And change management is not a miracle. It's a well-planned, intentional set of practices. And the goal is to increase the likelihood to the highest degree possible that an impacted group will adapt and then personally adopt the behavior. And I just want to stress again that IT code configuration management is different from user code change management. When we change code, we put it under configuration management, generally a well-performed, well-understood exercise and discipline. Changes imposed by the delivered incremental value on people is much harder, and it's generally not understood nor well-performed. Let's take a look at ProC real quick then and see how that particular model fits. It's the one that I'm certified in, and of all of them, it's the one that I find the most user-friendly for change management practitioners. So it uses the acronym ADKAR. There's the book over there that was written for it. It's kind of the quote-unquote ProC manifesto for change management, but it comes from that company, and Jeffrey Hyatt is the author. And it starts off with awareness, then desire, and it emphasizes that it's iterative and people, you have to be willing to go back. And then we talk about knowledge. How is this change going to happen? Then we talk about adding the competencies and skills to for the user group to actually make the change personally themselves. And then we talk about how do we reinforce the change to be sure that they don't go back to the old behavior. And sometimes it's in the new IT system itself. We have data fields that we change from free form to drop downs. So all of a sudden we have reinforced the behavior that they can only select a drop down. That's a very practical one, but there are many things that we do in the reinforcement phase, and in the ADKAR model, they offer lots of different suggestions. And generally it's a linear progression over an entire project, but within an iteration that has the very high potential of having to cycle back around the ADKAR acronyms. Change management should be a fundamental leadership competency if we are all about delivering IT change successfully. And that's more than just sending it into the production environment. I years ago developed a kind of a picture story around ADKAR. Basically, your product owner, sponsor, as the customer has said, hey, current state is bad, it's got pain, it's broken, it's a house on fire, and we want to go someplace else. So the first part of ADKAR is expressing the awareness to your team that the house is on fire, we're not staying here, and you got to be ready to move. And the place we want to go to is better, there's gold over there, and there's value in you going. That's the A and the D of ADKAR. But then what the challenge is we're asking our people to basically jump off the roof of the house and grab the hands of a guy that's on a hanging bar in the sky. This project that we're delivering Agile through. So we have to be ready to respond to questions like, will it make a difference? Am I going to be safe doing that? What will be better? What if I mess up? What's in it for me? The old with them. And we do that by having a well-planned approach. We stress that it's being piloted and improved. We're all together, no fault, no blame. There's all kinds of things in there, but basically it's doing everything we can to raise the confidence of the user group that we are going to make this journey to the new place in a very safe way for you. And in addition, we're going to train you on all the new behavior. So that's A, the ability. We will make sure you have the ability to successfully do the new behaviors that are supposed to be over in the future state. And then, oh, by the way, yeah, you're not going to go back. We will have controls, but we'll also have celebrations, incentives, monitoring, all of those kind of things. There's no going back. I was working for a big financial company in the IT side of it, and they decided to implement Agile, which is a software configuration management suite of practices. And part of one of the main goals of Agile is no one makes changes in the production environment. We make changes in the test environment, and then we deploy them. And the sponsor, the executive vice president, very clearly, when we got into the reinforcement phase, communicated to the entire developer staff, if you play in the production environment, you will be fired. He actually said that. Well, we had a lot of very smart developers who didn't believe he meant it. So the next week, literally, 2 individuals went in to the production environment, made changes which caused all kinds of severity 1 system outages. Needless to say, they were tested and they were walked out the door. So it doesn't have to be that extreme, but it does have to be potentially that much reinforcement. So that's ADKAR in a single one-page graphic. I use this a lot to communicate to teams that are trying to understand at a high level without all the jargon, what in the world are we trying to do? And it's easy to refer back to again. We have to have effective roles in change management. There is a role, this comes from PROCE itself, executive change champions, normally the sponsor, then change champions, usually the product owner, and then change agents, which are the intermediate management supervisors or influential staff members, and it might be immediate supervisors. And then there's informal roles. And oh, by the way, to be effective, we got to train them. And then you got to come alongside and coach them. Otherwise, they won't know what to do, and they won't sustain it. And ADCAR, the toolbox for PROCE, is very extensive. They have assessments, they have communication planning tools, training tools for the roles, new skills and competencies, training, reinforcement activities. So PROCE has a lot of very strong and very easy to use user change practitioner tools and things. And then how do we understand what's going on? Well, PROCE has designed the ADCAR to respond to this disruption curve. They call it the J curve. It's been around for a very long time. And again, it is showing the fallacy of us assuming that when a change is implemented, we get the red dotted curve. Productivity and performance goes up over time. And in reality, what happens is the blue curve, we got a period of disruption, performance crashes, productivity crashes. And what ADCAR does is designed to do is to manage to a green line, to shorten up potentially the period of disruption, and to, as much as possible, reduce the dip in productivity and in performance. The roles, I use kind of a pyramid shape. The executive change champions, they've got the overall accountability for effectiveness of the change and alignment with the business objectives. And then you got the change champions, product owners, etc. They are the ones that need to be actively and visibly supporting and actively engaging to develop strategies. And then you have change agents, and that's in the manager level, the frontline supervisors, other people, personal influence, and they're the ones that have the responsibility for delivering on the tactical stuff and get engaged with developing and changing strategies. Now, from my perspective with Agile experience, there are roles for Agile team members as change champions and as change agents. And I will develop that a little more in a second here. So there's other informal roles. There's an investigator, somebody who looks for clues. There's an advocate, someone who speaks up in favor of the change, kind of informally at the water cooler, that kind of stuff. There's an advisor who has deeper insight that can share the information. And then there's the encourager type person. And these are informal roles that we would look for as we move through a Agile iteration. Do we need an advocate to speak up? Does that role need to now show up in our change plan due to the significance of the incremental change we're going to deliver? Or do we need to go out and encourage whatever it is? But these are more informal roles that from a change management strategy perspective, we need to know should be in our toolbox. And we should have people that we've identified that could do this well. So I'll come back to this question in a second. Well, let me see how we've done on the survey. Let me pop it up, and I'll just use this as an opportunity. So mostly we're dealing with organizations changing from waterfall to Agile, or experiencing the change inside the Agile methodology itself. We have lots of yeses around these challenges. Matter of fact, we have none of them that have a majority of no answers. So these challenges are real, and you all seem to see them in your world. The training of these various roles, you'll notice change agents is the only one where we have any kind of identification and or level of assignment, if you will, and in many cases it's just no. Okay, all right, good, thank you for that. Let me then continue on. All right, there we go. All right, so where does it fit in the iteration? So first I want to say there's no silver bullet. Again, there's no change management manifesto. There are some 13, if you go in the industry, methodologies and assessment tools you could use. However, if we looked at a Scrum approach, then Audra Proctor, in her recent article, suggests that there are stories that we can write and put in the backlog that we can then pull into the sprint planning backlog that we can then work on in the sprint itself, which we can then work on and have as part of our sprint review or preparation for our sprint review, and then that we can consider the fundamental question: how well do we enable the user group to adapt and adopt the incremental value when we go into our sprint retrospective? The retrospectives that I've been involved in almost exclusively dealt with how did we, the Agile practitioner team, do this past iteration. I have yet to hear the question asked, how well did we enable our user group to adopt to the new behavior? So there are opportunities within, and again, this is a Scrum example, where we can put in stories that will make us way more effective. Another thing that comes from Melanie Franklin is we have to understand that change management in an Agile world is very interactive and integrated. It's not linear in any way, shape, or form, and we can bounce back and forth. And no matter what change methodology you adopt, all of these apply, and all of these should be considered, everywhere from an analysis all the way to training and coaching, readiness assessment, all of those things. So we move away from disruption to truly non-disruptive value add. Again, the implications are huge. Change management in a waterfall project is linear. In Agile, it has a linear reality that is expressed by high flexibility of reacting in with a tool or a technique based on an ongoing assessment we do of the user group. So our product owners and our sponsors, we need to be sure that they get the training and they understand their role in it, as well as the first line supervisors and as well as us as practitioners in a Agile iteration. So where might it fit? Well, first of all, it starts in Agile planning. And this is my review of where certain questions should be considered in an Agile planning cycle. Excuse me. And in a planning cycle, there are a number of minimum questions we ought to consider. I'm not going to look at all of these here, but have we shared the vision? Do they know what's coming and why? Do we understand how ready they are for adopting another change? Do they have time for training? Does our training address the new competence we want them from? Do we have an effective assessment system? Do we have an intentional communication plan? Do we have stories? And in the Agile planning cycle, there's opportunities for these questions to be asked and addressed. And then when I look back over my experience and look at it, we know that the product owner, representative of the sponsor, is ultimately accountable. But in every Agile team I've worked on, they've always talked about the importance of meeting with the user impacted group frequently. But in the meetings, it doesn't seem to be embracing effective change management stories that encompass at a high level. You know, there's another value add coming. It's not completed yet, but we're getting to the vision, and I'm going to do everything I can to help you adopt and adapt. That's where we should be thinking. We should be writing stories that enable us to do that. Here's two examples that come from Melanie Franklin. She put these out as examples. Change resistance. So if we go back to the Kubler-Ross change cycle, impacted people often have very visible signals of what's going on. And sometimes it happens in increased absenteeism, questioning, resistance. And we can do things to help people move through the various changes of the Kubler-Ross change curve. And the point is, we got to get them out of this valley of despair. We also need to know that we've got two Agile myths that are out there. One of them is that Agile is less process, and the other is that Agile is less architecture. And while there's a degree of truth to both of these, it oftentimes develops a mindset in the Agile team that change management is too structured, too formalized. We can't do it. That we have to challenge that. And the other myth or mindset that I hear often is we're an agile team. We're IT developers. We don't do this change management stuff. It's not our problem. It's the product owner. Well, I would challenge that that's not so. And in an article by Audrey Proctor, she also challenges that. So what signals would you look for? Well, there's rejection early. There could be anger. There could be frustration and despair. And then over time, there's kind of that neutral acceptance. And then we move into kind of a happy acceptance. And then we move into commitment. That is the overall linear end-to-end change curve. And our challenge is to understand, what are we seeing? When somebody, the same individual, calls us and is questioning all the time, are they in rejection or are they just getting in the acceptance time? We need to understand that. And we also need to understand and look for innovators and adopters, because they jump fast. There is a curve that's been out there for at least 50 years that talks about the adoption percentages in any group. And innovators and early adopters, they're on the front end. And then there's a chasm of proof that the early majority looks at to see if it's safe to move. And then after you've adopted and identified those, and you get the early majority to move, then you got this case of the late majority. You've got the case of the resistors. And then finally, you got the never changers. And the never changers vote with their feet generally. And usually you won't know who they are before they do it. And it'll surprise you. And it could be your most critical individual. What we want to do over time in our assessment is understand that people move from an initial contact where they hear a rumor to a sense of awareness, which we have to be cautious about, because awareness is not necessarily a good place, because it could be leading us right into this valley of despair. So we have to continually assess every iteration going out there. Are we seeing movement in understanding, positive perception, adoption, institutionalization? And we know we're successfully implemented it, not only into the production area, but into the new behavior when the vast majority of your user group have actually internalized it, which means they're beginning to think about, how can I make it even better? So what are the next steps? So here's the last question of the survey. I'm going to pop to it real quick, and then we're almost finished. Excuse me. So,
It's while you're doing that switch, we are at about 10 minutes.
Okay, got it. I'm almost finished. Thank you. So we have, let's see, where's here? No, that's that one. Here we go. So here's an interesting profile of things that we are going to, whoops. So when you take a look at the answers here, lots of yeses, some not nos on some of these, but in these 5 here that we have, lots of yeses. Retrospectives, change management effectives in the retrospective, that's a lot of yeses there. That's good. Ensure we have story iteration. Ensure that change management tools are in there. And so generally, you all have seen some value to this consideration. I don't know if you were thinking about the answers to these questions beforehand, but it seems that there's some convincing that I have been able to do. So thank you for that. And in summary, in closing, we can't let this continue on as Agile practitioners. This 50-50, almost 50-50 in successful, unchallenged from the user group perspective, deployment of iterative value has to be changed. How do we do that? Well, there's a lot of ways you can decide. Pick one and then do it. Add stories to the product backlog and the sprint backlog. And it requires more than just a just-in-time approach, because it requires you to assess and then have a just-in-time approach. You can't have that linear view of change management. It's highly iterative, and you have to do active assessing so you can make just-in-time changes. And the whole Agile team, in my perspective, has a role in effectively deploying change management. It's not one of those, that's the product owner's problem, because we see the results. So I thank you for your time, and I'll open up now for any questions or comments, and I'll bounce out of the presentation. And again, my apology for the cumbersomeness of the survey.
Hey, Ted, this is Elizabeth. I have a question.
Okay.
What does PROCY, that initial in front of ADCAR, stand for? Did I miss that totally?
Oh, yes, that's okay. PROCY is the name of the organization. It stands for Professional Science. And ADCAR is the acronym that they use for the 5 phases of their approach, where McKinsey has 8 and others have 7. ADCAR is the 5-phase approach that PROCY has put together. And PROCY is probably the number 1 change management technology that is used globally from a non-software application perspective. Change First is the one that has the widest dissemination that I know of in the market for a software-based change management approach.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Ted.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Hey there. So when you showed the pyramid of the different roles that are played, and the top of that pyramid was executive sponsorship.
Yeah.
How do you determine who that is? In the state police, for instance, I'm not going to go to the colonel for this stuff, mostly.
Right. Yeah. So the ready answer is it's your sponsor. The more conceptual answer is, and please take this in the way that is, who's the 500-pound person in the middle of the room that can break through all of the log jams and who can turn around and direct things to the product owner to engage and get the Agile team to engage in effective change management when there's indications that the people are just not getting it. Things are blowing up from a user group side. So typically I look to the sponsor first. If that sponsor is a middle manager and there's a potential conflict in the deployment of a iteration with a manager of another division, another department, somewhere else on the value stream, then I look for that individual who has the authority over the greater value stream. Does that help?
It does. Thank you. Michael Vizdos raised his hand.
Hey, Ted, a great presentation. Thank you. One of the things I want to kind of put into context for this group too is that role of a Scrum Master. If people are using Scrum on an Agile project, this is a great tool to put in your tool belt to remember and work with, the product owner and the sponsors, and really what Ted talked about, and put these stories and work with the product owner and the team to put these stories into the product backlog to make sure that you are effectively navigating through the change. So we know we talked about like the forming, storming, norming, performing things before too. This really does help the team get through that. So thank you, Ted. I just want to help put it in a little bit more context too.
Yep, thank you very much. Yeah, I kind of glossed over that in my last question, but yeah, the Scrum Master has a clear role, particularly when we're looking at a retrospective. Are we asking that question about the impact on the user group? And the Scrum Master would be the person that could bring that question to the retrospective where it might not naturally be there. But thank you. Yeah, they're right on, Michael.
Hey Ted, thanks for the change management discussion. I have one question regarding the change management. We know that there are several models, right? Different models that you just mentioned it, and there are 7S and there are sometimes 5S models. Do you think any preference that we need to use this kind of models, or we can use anything?
So the industry would tell you, as long as you embrace intentional change management and are willing to do what it takes to figure out the tools, techniques, and practices that you're going to implement, any one of those 7 models that I gave you can be adapted. In almost all of them, though, the assumption in the model is linearity. And if you buy into that assumption, then you lose the flexibility and the just-in-time repeating assessment of where are we from the user growth perspective that's so important in Agile. So for myself personally, that's why I use ProC everywhere. I use the ADKAR model, whether it's an organizational change or I'm changing the furniture around. As Barbara can tell you, we changed all the furniture around where we are right now 2 years ago, and we followed that ADKAR model, and it ended up being highly successful. But yeah, the importance is pick a model, figure out how to make it actionable, and then make it part of every iteration that you do.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Ted, I think one other question that occurs to me relates to those stories that you're talking about adding to the project backlog. It feels like you're going to end up doing those stories over and over again. So the question kind of, to me, comes back to at what point do you say this change is big enough that I need to go through all that?
Yeah, so I think you're right on the money. You will, if you intentionally embrace this, I think you will come up with 5 or 6 boilerplate stories, if you will, that then get tweaked based on the size and the impact of the incremental value being delivered, and also based on timing of the user group and their workload, what's going on with it. I mean, there are a lot of factors that we should think about intentionally. And I can see in lower impact releases that, yeah, we would only do 1 or 2 things. We have a communication story, let them know that's coming out, and this is the new behavior. It's these 5 things on this screen. Yeah, very big. All of a sudden, we're deploying a brand new e-billing system. Wow. We better have lots of stories that go all the way around ADKAR with iterative assessment as we walk through and get closer to release, to be sure that they're ready for what's going on and not be overwhelmed to the best degree that we can with the release when it goes out.
Okay, well, thanks, Ted, very much. Let me ask everyone, if you would, unmute and let Ted know that you appreciate the work that he's done. Thank you really for the morning, Ted. Very much appreciate it.
Yay.
Thank you, Ted.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Good job, Ted.
Thank you, Ted.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Thank you.
So let me remind you that the Jamboard is out there. Go, and there are about 15 of you that are in it right now. Please remember to go add your thoughts about what's happened so far this morning, and we'll pick that up again. We are now going to go into our morning break. We've got 15 minutes that we're going to take here. So please come back in about 15 minutes and we will start our panel discussion. So see you at 10:30. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Time to move into the panel discussion for the afternoon, and we're going to ask 3 other folks to join Ted on stage, as it were. We have Tom, Richard, and Sandra joining Ted, and then we're going to start by asking them to introduce themselves. So, esteemed panelists, please take 87 seconds and tell everyone a little bit about yourself. And Tom, let's start with you.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Stephen, can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, great, thanks. So as Stephen had indicated, my name is Tom Kramer. I am currently with VITA, Virginia Information Technology Agency. I manage one of VITA's PMOs, project management offices, specific to the enterprise solutions area. I also have a responsibility for some of the infrastructure services projects that are currently running through the MSI and the SAIC PMO. That's a very large portfolio for the Commonwealth. There are currently over 366 projects that are running through the infrastructure services MSI PMO. So it does take a considerable amount of time. I work with some folks in the MSI. I don't know if you're familiar with them. I'll name some names. Tim Kelly, he's their PMO manager. And then there's Chris Mock, who is their portfolio manager. I've been with VITA for about 6 years now. I'm mostly a product of private industry. I spent most of my career, 24 plus years, with General Motors and a few divisions of GM. Had an opportunity to live in the Detroit, Michigan area for about 14 years. Kind of cold. Certainly spent more years there than I had originally thought I would, but a lot of great experiences, and I'm certainly glad to have worked for that organization. So that's just a little bit about me.
Great. Thanks very much, Tom. Richard.
Stephen, can you hear me okay with my mic?
Yes, sir.
Excellent. My name is Richard Matthews. I'm born a Virginian, grew up, studied here in Richmond, Virginia. Then took a right turn, joined the Navy, was a SEAL platoon commander. For a decade, I think I spent more of that time overseas than I did at home. And when I got out after my time in the Navy, went right back into supporting the military. Did it with as a contractor, defense contractor, working with some companies, Northrop Grumman and Raytheon. So I'm also a product. Well, I'm a product of the federal government and of I guess that sphere. Had a lot of programmatic experiences. Educated again here in Richmond, Virginia. I'm in the Soviet Union at Moscow State University, and after the Navy, a couple of masters that I knocked out for business and strategic change leadership. I've been at VITA. I work there now for just about 4 months. So I'm a new hire to VITA. In my role, I'm the director of the project management division, where I interface with a number of agencies trying to get the projects approved into successful fruition for the Commonwealth. It's about a minute 30 what I have.
Thanks, Richard. Sandra.
Good morning. Stephen, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. Well, my name is Sandra Magruder. I work with Department of Taxation. Been at taxation for 19 years. I'm actually the Agile coach there for technology. I'm also a senior function analyst as well, too, excuse me. Let's see. And so as my role at taxation, we did our transformation we did in 2017. So we spent about 2 years going through our transformation. And then after that point, we brought together a development team. So we have a set of actual development teams and then a set of infrastructure teams. We probably have a total of 12 teams. We actually do a combination of Scrum and Kanban together for it. It's been very interesting. We actually brought in a couple of business teams that actually want to use some of the Agile framework to work with their teams. And so right now we're just moving forward. We actually just did an upgrade to DevOps 2020. And along with that, we made some changes to hopefully make Agile transformation that is completed to actually make our Agile journey more successful going forward.
Excellent. Thank you, Sandra. Ted, I'm going to
You're
assume
welcome.
that we all know who you are now. So we'll skip your intro. Now, a few words about logistics. Google Meet does provide an easy way for us to get questions from you in the audience. If you look down in the lower right corner of your screen, you'll see a row of symbols, and one of those is a triangle, square, and circle. If you click on that symbol, you'll be taken to activities. The third one down is Q&A. So click on Q&A, then you'll see a button that says ask a question down at the bottom of the screen. So type in your question, and then you can either press enter or click on post. If you want your question to be directed to a specific panel member, then be sure to include their name in that. Now, to get us started, I do have some questions that were sent in through the survey. So we're going to begin with those. Panelists, remember that we've got a lot of ground to cover. We've only got about 53 minutes to do that in, so please keep your answers to the point. No more than 4 minutes for each one. Don't make me put on my Sergeant at Arms badge for this, okay? All right, so the first question is going to go to Tom. Tom, on the project teams that you oversee, is there a role that typically manages change for the team?
Yeah, this is kind of an interesting question. So I would say, yeah, traditionally, change management probably starts with a project manager. That's always kind of been my experience. VITA's maturity associated with change management, I've actually seen a big progression of that, I guess, over the past 6 years. When I first started with VITA, there really wasn't any formal change management discipline there. It was change management occurred, but it wasn't necessarily formalized, and there weren't any traditional official resources associated with that. The first sign of some maturing associated with change management within VITA probably occurred when VITA developed this group that they called business readiness. They've done a really nice job, that group, of helping with some rather large enterprise level type projects. I think the one that really comes to mind is the messaging project. That's the project that's currently in flight. Originally, we obviously had Google as the messaging provider. That's currently transitioning. Some agencies have migrated to Microsoft and Outlook. VITA is certainly one of them. That project had been going on probably for about a year and a half. It started obviously with us bringing on a new provider and obviously displacing the old provider. The original intention was for VITA to offer more than one messaging solution service. However, that changed with the new administration, and with that change, certainly made change management kind of pretty important. So the change management group, or the business readiness group within VITA, has really done a great job with the current messaging project and the migrations that are currently occurring. We're doing about maybe 4 agencies a week or a weekend. VITA was one of the pilot agencies, so certainly having VITA go first, I think, was kind of instrumental in us understanding what needed to get done from a change management perspective. But traditionally, I think it starts with the project manager, and then if an organization has the ability to be able to leverage some formal change management professionals, I think there's a big benefit associated with that. VITA has continued their change management journey, and they've actually added 2 new change management resources. They both came from state agencies. They just started about a month or so ago. So I know we've started to interact with them with some new projects that we've currently kicked off at VITA. So I look forward to being able to have them participate in our enterprise level projects.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Tom. The next question is for Sandra. As an Agile coach, what is your recommendation on ensuring that change management happens every sprint or iteration?
So I would say the biggest thing is communication. I would say change management for the Agile team. We've just kind of begun that type of change management. It's ironic, we actually have a change management team at Taxation, but that team is actually specifically for when we're doing releases for code. It's not the overall change management. And since we've actually went through the transformation, and especially with the DevOps upgrade that we just did, we realized with change management, we actually didn't have a really mapped out change management process to use for it. So we're actually just beginning that to work, and we hope to work with their PMO office on that as well too, to get that implemented in. So right now with their sprints and iterations, I would say the biggest thing and my biggest recommendation that we actually use is communication, because of the fact we still have some resistance to Agile, even though we've gone through the transformation. And because again, we tend to, because we're not working closely yet with the PMO office, we tend to still have a lot of waterfall editing with project plans and updates of smart sheets, along with doing the iterations and doing development. And there's still individuals who still want to have all the requirements done before we actually start work on it. So the biggest one for a recommendation right now for us is communication. That communication also includes understanding why we're making changes the way we are, why we're actually doing things in an iterative approach. One of the things we did do when we went to DevOps that we didn't do when we were in TFS is we allowed teams to pick their own iterations. So we had dozens and dozens and dozens of iterations, which lacked for communication, it lacked for metrics, it lacked for reporting. So what it did was it didn't give us the transparency we needed. So along with that recommendation, when I start seeing teams not having transparency, when I see that they're not putting their work out there so that any stakeholder can review what's there and be able to determine where they see the team's going, then that's when we want to get those meetings back together and we start talking about communication. We actually had CapTech work with us to actually do the DevOps implementation. I had a great contractor that worked with me on it. We were able to really get some things really solidified so that everybody would follow the same cadence, so that everybody doesn't have permission to just do everything like they like to do, so that people understand the difference between what a team is and what an area and what a board and how that works together. And so that we could I'll use that old word synergy, use that synergy of the teams for everyone on the team to realize that they might work on multiple projects, but when we come together, we can actually get their work done. So along with what I say about communication, I'll say this for, that also requires that we are constantly meeting with the managers so that we can let the IT managers know it's not just so much of what the teams are doing, but exactly what can they also do to help the teams and how that support when we get from them is a trickle down effect, because I'm sure everybody knows if you don't have the support from the higher ups, it makes it very hard for everybody else who's actually doing the work every day.
Definitely. All right, thank you, Sandra. That's
Sure.
for Richard. In your current position, do you have a change management as a priority for Vita PMO? And if so, can you describe your intentions? What are you tasking your subordinates to do?
Great question. I would say from my initial view, Vita PMD also already places a high value on the effort and import of change management. I've observed how PMD, and when I reference PMD, that's Project Management Division at Vita, they already teach classes on organizational change management, and for all of our categorized projects, 1, 2, and 3, the change management plan, that organizational change management plan, is a required document. We continue to be an advocate focusing on OCM as well as waving the red flag whenever there's a project that appears to be neglecting this element or missing some aspects of the element for project success. So overall, is it a priority? Yeah, OCM is critical to our project success. Management, stakeholders, and users are all incorporated. Plus that OCM, just for everybody's edification, is required for these categorization projects 1, 2, and 3 within 6 months after approval. But I'll tell you, my intentions with Vita PMD is a little bit different. Now, directly from my boss, who has communicated his vision to us and communicated to the governor, I have a mission to increase the efficiency of PMD. Now, he said to me, get through the process faster. And as everybody knows, that's not sending emails faster. That's not typing faster or shortening the steps that we have. We have developed a process for project success that has served the Commonwealth very well. This works and there's no problem with it. He's asking for ways to get through it faster. So one of these intents that I have and missions is to try to change the way we view the customer. And from my team, I clearly hear Virginia code. It says that PMD has one customer, and that is the Commonwealth CIO, my boss. But I think that misses the view that a lot of people experience, is that our, if you will, customers are anybody who uses our process. And our process is good, but it doesn't encompass every methodology. Methodologies have changed since the inception of this process. And I believe we have some opportunities to incorporate different, if you will, methodologies in here. I have gone through the standard and the guide, and I know that methodologies are already incorporated, but in taking this view of how the customer is different, we don't just report to the CIO, and that every agency that uses Vita is essentially part of that process or customer. I think we need to reduce the internal informational silos, stovepipe to increase the information and communication internal to Vita, so we can be more responsive to the agencies, but also externally. And without getting into the details of exactly what I'm tasking each person to do, we are reviewing the process. We are incorporating some changes. For example, digital signatures, utilizing our system of record instead of sending out a stamped certified letter saying, hey, your project has been approved, and that's great. But I think everybody files those letters into a file in case of an audit. We're looking to utilize the technology we have to be responsive to the CIO, reduce those cycle times, but also change the way our relationship works internally and externally. It's a broad topic. I could probably talk for hours on it. I'm trying to keep it at a high level. So
yeah, maybe you and I could talk later.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, Ted. Should system and business process change be managed or coordinated at the agency level or at the division or department level?
Well, I mean, the straightforward answer is yes. I think the answer at the next level down revolves around the question of how big. How big's the impact? What's the timeline? We have a project going on in where I'm working right now, supporting VSP, the Criminal Justice Information System, and that project is not going to be scheduled not scheduled right now to be deployed till 2025. So where are we going to manage the process changes that are incorporated in this? Well, ultimately, we got to manage it at the value stream. What are all the processes inside the business that are encompassed in the scope of this change? But because it's a value stream that we're looking at, we have then the natural conflicts of priorities between the various different elements that own pieces of that value stream. And not for any negative reason, priorities are different across the value stream in some cases, and we've got to figure out a way to have the right individual at the right level who can ensure that we're not sub-optimizing or putting barriers up that are unneeded. So again, I believe that answer to this question is very much tied to the scope of the value change that's going on. And if it's as big as this one that I'm referring to, then yeah, it has to be managed at a very high level. But on the other hand, some of the work that I'm doing is right in the front of the information system work that the staff is doing here, and it can be very much managed just by the manager level itself. So kind of a wishy-washy answer, but the truth is it depends on the scope.
Yep.
From my perspective.
All right. Thanks, Ted. I'm going to flip back to Tom here. Tom, we have a follow-up to your question from the audience. What credentials or certifications did you look for when you recruited those change management resources?
Yeah, so kind of interesting. I did have an opportunity to participate on the interview panel for those positions. I think the certifications I think we were kind of looking for were the ones that you would traditionally find within a project management arena. Change management or project management are so closely related that a lot of what we were looking for change management professionals were individuals that had a good background in project management, and especially those individuals that had a really good background with state agencies and project management. The ecosystem that we find ourselves in when we do projects within state government here in Virginia is unique. It's certainly not one that you find in private industry. There is density associated with some of the processes, especially if it rises to the level of a state level project. So certainly having individuals doing change management at VITA and having had exposure and experience to doing technology projects within Virginia state government, I think were important. Individuals with the project management background, certainly if they have a PMP, that helps. Certified Scrum Master, that helps as well. A CSM. Anybody with an ITIL certification or those certifications, I think are important as well. The big certification that I think is important with change management is the one called ProSci. That seems to be one that is viewed very favorably within change management. If you're hiring a project manager, you're probably looking for somebody with a PMP certification, and certainly if you're looking for a change management professional, those individuals with that ProSci certification, I think are distinguished, and certainly those are the individuals that we were looking for when we added those two change management positions.
Okay, thanks for that. Ted, no, you can't apply.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the captain would say, nope, I'm gainfully employed.
All right, our next question for anyone or all of you on the panel. In Agile, we talk about leaders at all parts of the organization hierarchy. Where in the organization do you find those Agile change leaders?
So I'll take a quick stab at it. So if you remember the slide that had the pyramids in it, clearly there has to be someone that is the accountable for whatever change is being worked in Agile to ensure that that aligns with the business objective and the business vision we're trying to get to. And as I said before, it might be the sponsor, or it might actually be someone senior to the sponsor if we have multiple parts of the value chain being involved in it. But I think we really need to embrace the fact that there are three levels of roles that go from the very formal structure all the way down to the informal. Hey, is there someone that is ready and prepared on our team to go out and advise these three individuals because they're not just not getting it in advance? Or is there someone that is really good at communicating this concept and out there? So I think we haven't really embraced very well the idea of these informal roles, which, I mean, basically it's about a relationship with people and having them move from being aware, where it's a water cooler conversation and they add all kinds of rumors to it, to the place where they really want to participate because we've answered the what's in it for them and all those other things. And in the middle then is that management level, direct supervisor, manager level, who is responsible for ensuring that we actually deploy an effective change management plan and that we assess that effectiveness on a regular basis and make changes as we need. My thoughts.
Yeah, I can kind of jump in on that. Thanks, Ted. So when I think of Agile, right, I think of very few roles, right? Agile is very simple and it's focused, and it really just has a few roles. Over the years, I've been involved in a bunch of Agile teams where we've kind of added some roles of our own, just because that's the way the organization looks to deliver against projects, whether it be traditional waterfall or agile or a combination of the two. A lot of organizations kind of do a hybrid approach. I've heard the term agile used over the years, and it's kind of, it's funny, but it is kind of a fitting term. But change management and agile, looking at your traditional agile roles, the product owner is probably one of the more important individuals. You would look to the product owner to not only provide the guidance associated with requirements, but also maybe the voice of the customer. That's a term that I was kind of first introduced to in my time with General Motors, and it's still very relevant. So an executive sponsor, I think, would be another important change management lead, but also the Scrum Master. I think the Scrum Master, just like a traditional project manager, would be some individual that would be very prominent, working with the product owner or the executive sponsor associated with looking to deliver against some type of change management within an agile environment.
Richard or Sandra?
Coming off mute, I'll add my 2 cents to it, and definitely in lockstep agreement that it's that communication, the one that cycle. Ted, when you were talking about the circular, the circular repetitive patterns, instantly thought of Colonel Boyd's OODA loop, and as he taught it, at our fighter pilots way back. Anyway, in that communication from the teams and from my experience, one of the attempts is trying to push that decision level to the lowest possible. As you push that decision level down to a reasonably and effectively low level, everybody has to internalize and internalize the vision. And as that vision's internalized, then they can individually act on this change leader. So the leadership really comes at all different levels. But key, Tom, you were saying it as well, as the vision has to be communicated. You have to get people enlisted in that vision. Again, that's the primary step of communication. And then once it's internalized, every level can effectively lead different aspects of change. And then the outliers are the problems, and the problems get highlighted very quickly because decisions are being made by everybody at every different level. Just a thought.
And I would actually agree with that, and I would just add to it, especially at least with taxation, because of stakeholders. We have some stakeholders who are very, very vocal, and sometimes they get more say than the executive team does. So if they have something to say, everybody listens. So we have to learn that if you don't have those stakeholders involved, that if you just start at the top and start with the executive and start there, and then come down to the team and just leave it to the Scrum team, to the product owner, those stakeholders will be the first ones that go back to the executive team and say what they didn't get, what they wanted, they were left out, they should have been involved, even if it's not directly a product or a service for them. So I would agree, it does have to be at all levels for it. You need that buy-in at the top, but sometimes at the bottom, and some of those stakeholders are not at the bottom, but they're still very, very, very vocal. It is important to have them involved, because once they get involved, they tend to be those ones that champion everything. If they don't like something, everybody knows they don't like it. But if they agree with something on it, it makes the job for all the Agile teams and all the Kanban teams to work more effectively.
Yeah, so a strong plea for knowing your customer.
Absolutely.
Yes, and know which customers are the most important customers. There are some customers, I call them, they're like a Jeff Bezos, because when they speak, things get done. When everybody else speaks, nothing gets done. And they speak on everything, regardless whether it affects them directly or not.
Yep. Richard, there's a question for you in the Q&A board. It says that the PMBOK doesn't identify a separate OCM plan, but VITA does require an OCM plan. You mentioned that a while ago, as a matter of fact. The VITA OCM plan focuses on stakeholder identification and training for a waterfall project. Will that plan be revised to focus on iterative OCM?
And it feels like one of the guys is on here writing the questions. This is something that we are working through right now. The PMBOK doesn't require it. Stakeholder identification is probably one of the key things for project success. Failing to get a key stakeholder can result in some serious ripples and problems. So I understand why VITA PMD requires it. Yes, we're looking to enhance the requirements to really get down to brass tacks and find out what we need to require, which is our standard. But our guide will expand that. In fact, there exists a section of our guide devoted to methodologies, including Agile. It's already there. But specifically to this question, yes, we are looking at revising as PMBOK 6 changes to PMBOK 7, including tests. We are looking to revise that as well in incorporating how additional methodologies, Agile, hybridization can be included to hit the thou shalls so that it can be effective for every agency. So that is something internally we are discussing on qualification standards, how to revise that. Yes, we're working on that.
Okay, thank you. Next question is also for the panel. Is there a difference in how your agency approaches change management in business-focused projects versus technology projects?
So in my world that I'm working with here at VSP in the Bureau of Administrative Support Services, I'm specifically working in the area that is called Criminal Justice Information Services. And I was brought in to basically help make the processes more efficient as they are waiting for new technology to emerge and be deployed. So the challenge is not that we got a new IT thing that's coming around the corner, but instead the challenge is, do we know where we are right now from a process perspective? Do we have metrics that show our performance? Do we know who our customers are? Well, we're meeting them. Do we have documented best practices that we are expecting everyone to use? Those fundamental questions that, help us, if you will accept the analogy. You can't get to Disney World if you don't know you're in Richmond. And I find from a process business perspective, most people do not really know very well where Richmond is compared to how their business process is performing. So I'm doing a business process management project, but I'm doing it with ADCAR overlaid over top of it. Because otherwise, TED is just another disruption, another pain in the neck who's taken away the time that I'm already behind because my workload is too heavy. So I personally have worked in government. I've worked the Y2K project at the White House. I've worked in commercial major insurance agencies. I've worked in nonprofits. I have had no experience, be it an IT tech project or be it a business process project, where change management doesn't come into play in order to take into account what's going on in the user world, the impacted group world.
Yeah, I think I can kind of weigh in on this one. I do think that there is a difference between a change management approach for business-focused projects versus technology projects. When I look at traditional technology projects, I think of it in terms of probably two main areas, right? So obviously, it's the deployment of some type of new system or version upgrade or adding some significant functionality set to an existing application. So you would traditionally have a deployment kind of activity associated with that, right? And then you would have the rollout. So the deployment is somewhat different than the rollout, right? So the deployment is the introduction of the technology, and then the rollout is, I think, mostly focused on that change management piece, right? That training piece for the user community. And I think the change management piece with the technology project, is focused in on that, right? So if it's the change from an existing system to a new system, so obviously, what's that new functionality? What's that new experience going to look like for the user community? Is there going to be some kind of training that we're going to be having to provide for them on that new system? And then once you do the training, right, you know, everybody's got some questions associated with the new system. Getting comfortable with the new application and, you know, associating the clicks and what you do when certainly develops over time. So that ongoing support model, I think, is important when you're dealing with a technology project that you may not necessarily get when you're dealing with a strictly a business focus related project. So I kind of do see a difference between a change management approach with a business project versus just a traditional technology project.
And I would go after behind what Tom said, because I agree with that as well. Because at tax, with the business users and their projects, they really do focus on that end result of receiving training. They want to know they have training. They want to know what something's going to do, how it makes a difference. On a technology side, we're more, our focus generally is more on the fact that we've had things developed, tested, moved into production. But in that testing phase and moving to production, the business wants to know, well, exactly what is it going to do, how it's going to do it, what does it affect, how do I train differently on it, have you documented this so I can see all these things forward. We don't tend, not that we don't document do all those things in technology, we do, but that focus is more on the detailed design of it and the back end of it, not so much on the front all the time for it. So the business users generally will come back and they will always compare something to what they've done for when they've made some changes that was on the business end. We have all this documented, we got lots of training on it, we set up environments so we could play around with it. And so when we tend to roll things out and we have not done that, then that's when the business comes back to let us know we're in that change management. We expected much more time to have training. We expected y'all to let us see that when we're doing iteratively, that we would have seen things in that approach to it, that we would have had training in that way forward, that we would have had environments set up to be able to do those things, which we can't always set up an environment to do it, but those are the things they expect for it. Then they do expect that ongoing support afterwards on it, and that ongoing support for them is not just that I should be able to ask the question. We realized, especially with the DevOps upgrade, that business, we set up a support site, we ask you to use that support site so we can track those metrics and so we can see if there's things we need to change. Business still would rather come directly to you, directly call you, directly send you an email, directly get their questions answered, directly say, you set up training videos, but I want to answer this way. I want to see it in writing. I need to see when you're going to update it. You just send it out to us so we can review it first. So I think at least at taxation, we see that change management is different because when business implements their projects, they really are focused on training, really on focused on how do they use it, as opposed to the fact that something that's been rolled out, it's going to help you do this, it help you do that, because they seem to feedback, and I agree with that. You can say it's going to help us do everything that we need to do, but if we don't know how to use it, and we don't have anything to compare it to, so we know that it's not doing what we think it should be doing with it, then how do we know that that's a project that was of a benefit to us as those stakeholders?
Stephen, I'll add in two quick cents. Well, short in experience at Vita, specifically from the agencies, there really has to be two different ways to approach this. One of the things that I hear all the time is traditional, right? The waterfall method. I don't believe that every project should be run that way. I think there's empirical evidence that shows those long projects are either the scope isn't well defined or the budget's up to 160% off at some instances. And that becomes problematic when you're trying to deliver time cost in a concise package, especially if you're tracking EV data for the federal side. When you apply that here, I think there needs to be specific rote agile projects. I think there needs to be specific traditionals, especially in the procurement realm, and there needs to be that understanding of that hybrid approach where you can blend the two, especially if you have a long traditional project where it has to incorporate software in DevOps. And that understanding, I think, is intrinsic for my organization to pick up and be able to communicate to the agencies so that there is a standard and an understanding and clarity on what must be hit and how we recommend to get to some other points.
Excellent. So it's at this point that I wish that we were all sitting around the same table, because then we can throw stuff at each other. Moving on, the next question is for Tom. What are two of the biggest challenges you encountered regarding change management in private industry and in state government?
Yeah, so this is kind of interesting. I think the biggest challenge sometimes is organizations not necessarily recognizing that they need to do change management. And I think a lot of that is I thought it was kind of interesting when I saw the responses to the questions at the very beginning of what you shared, Stephen. At the beginning of this seminar. I think that's pretty much a very common theme, right? That it's like the word agile, right? So everybody's like, yeah, I mean, agile, it's great, right? Because it's agile, it's got to work. How can you argue with taking an agile approach to things? And certainly, how can any organization or anybody argue against change management? It's so universally you're recognized as far as the need to do it. But actually doing it, I think, are two completely different things. I'm not quite sure anybody would argue against doing change management, but then when you sit down and say, okay, well, what does that mean to us as an organization and how are we going to go about doing it? Then there's a little bit of a pause. And the pause is around, well, how to execute it, right? And as project management professionals, that's really what we revolve around, right? I mean, we revolve around executing against certain efforts and activities. We're change agents. We're managers of change, and adding change management as a significant component to any one particular project. I think it's becoming more common, but I don't think it's as common as it should be. So I think the biggest challenge is still just organizations actually doing it and acting on change management. Sometimes it's difficult to do that, take those added steps, right? I think that goes back to that example that I had given, which is, when you've got a technology project, sometimes it's far easier to deploy the technology than it is to actually roll it out. Rolling out, I think, involves user adoption, some additional communication, some understanding of what the user community's experience is going to be with that new set of technology, and then preparing them for it. I know at Vita, certainly I think we've done a much better job with some of our enterprise level projects that we've done lately, and I'll use that example again of the messaging project. I look at that as one that Vita has done a much better job around. There's another project, the enterprise level project that we're currently preparing for, associated with modernizing websites and supporting that. But clearly that next project will have even a better opportunity, and we'll take some of those learnings that we discovered and uncovered as part of the messaging project, and in supporting agencies as they migrate. We can certainly apply that to that next project set, that next enterprise level project set.
Yeah, I think anyone in technology would agree, Tom, that our jobs would be much easier if we didn't have to deal with people. Sandra, next question. At what point do you change direction if you realize that your change management plan is not working as well as expected?
Well, at this point, since we're just kind of beginning at change management, because it wasn't part of the transformation, it hasn't really been part of what we focus on in Agile. The point that I think that I would give direction and change again comes from communication, because you'll have certain teams or certain members of teams, sometimes the managers and some the product owners along with that will actually come back to say something isn't working, we don't see the transparency, we're not sure we're going to be able to get this done, we don't think we need this change. Or sometimes they're just real straightforward about, what, everything's being changed. Doesn't seem that's what we asked for. They want to change things on us. We want requirements to change, and they're saying we have to do A, B, and C, and we don't want to do that. So I guess for myself, at the point that I get to change the direction is when I start getting those communications, and especially ones that say about not having transparency, or it looks like the project is going in a different direction. At those points is when then I want to talk to a Scrum Master, talk to talk to the, again, vocal stakeholders that I mentioned earlier, and we sit down and have a conversation. Basically with the Agile, with our whole project with Agile and the transformation, we had a deputy CTO who is actually the leader of the Agile project piece that we sit down and have those conversations with. And so once we realize what communication is, it seems like, I don't want to say a problem, but it seems like we potentially need to make changes. That's when initially I would actually start to be able to say, let's sit down and have a conversation. Again, because of the way we did the transformation that I don't think I mentioned earlier, we actually brought up all the teams at once. So we brought up quite a few development teams. As opposed to just bringing up teams specifically for actual projects, we brought teams up to actually be Agile teams and actually be Scrum teams. So because of that, that makes that we have a lot of teams. So sometimes it's hard in a week for me to be able to attend all the plannings, to be able to attend all the stand-ups, to be able to have separate meetings, to be able to spend time with the product owners, to be able to ensure we continue some kind of community of practices. It's just not enough time to be able to do that with all the teams for it. So when I start hearing things that are being vocalized, that's when I'm like, okay, it's probably time for us to sit down and see what direction needs to change on something.
Okay. Richard, what should IT development teams know about PMD consultations, governance, and oversight, and especially oversight?
That's a wide question. When it first showed up, I had an impression. I look for analogies. I look for historical models, and try to link what we're currently doing to at least what I've studied in the Oracle or Delphi came up, and it stuck in my head. So somebody, an influential source, wisdom that people referred to, and how I extrapolate that to Vita at PMD. What should we know? PMD has a wealth of experience. We have some significantly experienced consultants that are well-versed in what the requirements are, well-versed in product leadership, in management, and including the auditing side. Get us involved as early in the process as possible, especially on oversight and governance. The only reason that we exist is to increase the possibility or chance of a project being successful. And I know some agencies that do more projects may see that, say, Vita as an imposition. We're trying to change that. But there are other agencies that do projects infrequently. And I think they benefit from a lot of the knowledge and involving, but it's involving PMD early on in the process. I think that relationship with the ITEM portion of Vita is key, from the CAM to the procurement side, as well as the project side. I think as we break down our internal communication barriers to free flow information across Vita, it's only going to benefit the likelihood of a project coming to fruition. What you should know also, we look at the $250,000 threshold, and I personally hold that that threshold was set years ago, and with a decade or two of inflation, that threshold should be higher, but that's still the threshold right now. So that 250,000 threshold is the threshold for governance and oversight. The responsibility of the Commonwealth CIO takes over. So if it's above that, that's where PMD gets involved. If it's below it, then it's up to the agency to involve. What else should we know? There's an entire IT investment life cycle that is administered by PMD. This is familiar to your agencies, ADER. They kick off the life cycle. The project manager should be involved, essentially trained on this. And as the PM becomes involved in the business case approval and in the initiation phase, this life cycle will clearly govern what needs to be done and typically when, in order to get that project's approvals, execution, and even through closeout. They're throughout their various gates. It's a 51-step process. Again, I look at it as a process that has served us well. It can be modernized, but I don't want to take out anything that's protecting the taxpayer, all of us, from expenditures that may not benefit the state as well as it could. Failed project. And since the inception of Vita, the the type and number of failed projects have essentially abated to zero. You should also know that there's a project manager qualification process that sets the standards for what the candidate PM should know with knowledge, training, education, and experience commensurate with the cost, risk, and complexity of the project. I mentioned earlier the categorization that we run, category 1 through 4, with different cost, risk, complexity, and even agency experience of these individual categorizations of projects. Category 1 being the most complex, has the most oversight and governance. Category 4, obviously the other end of the spectrum. I would say that what you should also know is there are a plethora of documents out there on the PMD website, vita.virginia.gov. Look for the project side. When you look through there, there are websites, there are trainings, there are guides and documents, standards, qualification standards. Read through them. We see that the standard is the most referenced document out there that tells you the shalls, what you shall do. The second most referenced document is what does it take to become a PM. But third and fourth down the list are those guides. You know, a very thick document that tells you there are other methodologies, and this is the best practices to get to these steps. And oh, by the way, there's a programmatic guide as well to help agencies develop from projects to larger programs. Let me try to do the takeaway. I think MD consultants, they have technical skills, they understand technology, the process, the software development, hardware upgrades. They've done it, some for 20, 25 years. They are wizards at managing budgets and schedules. They're stuck on the PMD lifecycle. And as I said earlier, Stephen, we're trying to incorporate other methodologies to help flow and incorporate Agile into this standard. But they're well versed in this lifecycle, and incorporation of them at the earliest point is probably the best thing for project success.
Right. Yep. That kind of feels like a wrap-up question, but we've got a few more. Ted, how has your Six Sigma training changed the way you manage projects?
So my Six Sigma is in its core, is a fundamental process improvement methodology that was designed around the concept that if you can reduce the variation in the delivery of whatever it is you're doing for your customer, then you will improve the ability to have a satisfied customer. And Six Sigma has a whole bunch of techniques underneath it that are very statistical based. So what I have discovered is that my Six Sigma background has given me the ability to analyze data in a much different way than is often done. And coupling that with my change management, I have the ability to look at assessments of where user adoption is and user adaption is on larger groups and be able to analyze it at a different level that might provide additional visibility into what's going on. And also a part of the Six Sigma methodology is a very focused section, if you look at the methodology, on the impact of the customer and the impact of the process. And the impact of the process obviously includes the impact to the process performers, process users. So once we get back into that mindset that we got people involved on both the customer side, the process side, and ultimately also on the supplier side, then we are bringing in the need to look at effective change management. But fundamentally, Six Sigma is all about a very structured and statistically heavy method of figuring out where's the problem, what's the possible solution, How do we design experiments to test those possible solutions? How do we use the data to understand the impacts of going with solution A versus solution B versus solution C? So it's very much in the process improvement basis, and it is all about reducing variation in performance so that we can get down to that area where we are highly repeatable, have a repeatable environment into which then we can introduce solutions that make things better.
Okay. I think this next panel question will be the last one for the morning. What steps or best practices are recommended to address change resistance?
Well, I'll just take a stab at this. So another reason why I really like the PROCE ADCAR approach is PROCE emphasized, or the ADCAR methodology emphasizes that you don't do the same thing to address and mitigate resistance as your user group, your impacted group is going from awareness to desire to knowledge to ability and to reinforcement. Communications is obviously fundamentally a baseline across all of it, but there are a number of assessments that should be considered regular best practices as you experience moving a team of impacted people from, hey, this change is coming, this is what it's all about, into we really think it's going to be good for you for these reasons, and the personal with them and that kind of stuff, to this is the plan for how we're going to do it, and these are the things that we will ensure that if you engage with us, you're not going to get hammered for mistakes, that kind of stuff, to this is the training you're going to need, this is the behaviors that'll start, this is what'll stop, those kind of things, to finally, this is how we're going to sustain it, and reinforcement. And so communication clearly in there, but combined with communication is a need for just-in-time effective assessments around where in the world are our user group and our impacted group. And that is common to all of those change methodologies that I shared with you, with the audience, although some of them are well-defined and some of them aren't. So that combination of communication and adjusting the communication to the audience and to where they're progressing on the change journey, as well as to an effective just-in-time assessment, so we can adjust our communication. Those are the two best practices I would talk about.
Yeah, I would think communications is mission critical when it comes to addressing change resistance. That's always been the area that I think whenever I've managed projects or participated in projects, I've always looked to good communication plan and maintaining consistent and good communications during the life of the project, I think are important. But then also bringing in communications professionals. So within Vito, we've got a communications group, and certainly we look to bring them in addition to the change management and business readiness areas. We look to bring communications into to our projects to not only help us identify, the areas that we need to communicate around, but the means, methods, and mechanisms that we use to communicate, and then the different forms of communications that would be best based on what we're doing.
I'm following up on your comments and Ted on yours. Communication's key. I think I'm a Cotter acolyte. I don't think it's exactly as linear as communicated, but that communication of the vision and getting people to enlist to understand why the change is so important. I think that's going to break down the barriers to resistance. At least I've found that one, that, hey, look, if we don't evolve, we die. Utilizing that type of knowledge, doing the same thing for 20 years might be good. But if the world's changing around you, you also might be the one thing that's not changing. Communicating that vision on why we need to change, what are the benefits to it, and then incentivizing and measuring those those behaviors are what you really want to do. You don't want to measure on yesterday's behaviors and award and grade on yesterday's behaviors if you're trying to get people to move to something different. And the agencies have, leadership has a great way to communicate that vision, but if they're also incentivizing, hey, these new behaviors are the way to go, that's where people are typically going to run. If it's resistance to just change, oh, I get bonus and accolades for going in that other direction. That's hugely helpful. So, my thoughts.
Yeah, that last part in the Pro-C ADCAR model is a key element of reinforcement and sustaining the incentives and the motivation and continue it on. In my experience working in government, I have found that we are not very good at vision casting and at understanding the different levels of audience need a different view, a different rephrasing, if you will, of the vision. And very often it ends up being a recitation of a War and Peace document where everybody falls asleep after the first 2 or 3 sentences.
Well said, Ted.
That's just my experience, though.
Sandra, we'll leave the last word to you.
I think everybody kind of sums it up because, again, I still say communication is the biggest form. I agree 100% what Ted said about that fact of, excuse me, of ensuring at the end, you have to be able to ensure that you're giving different communications to different audiences. The whole assumption that everybody takes the same communication and sees it the same way leads individuals to say, well, you didn't address my changes, or you didn't address what I needed. What you did was address, and you can tell me all day it's going to work, but if you haven't really taken the time to ask me why I'm resisting the change, it's going to make it harder for me to do it. I think in the end, at least with the teams at Tax, having worked with them, when we say it's something that just has to be done, that generally makes the resistance even worse because we haven't given them an opportunity to say why to them they don't understand the change or think the change is needed, or why are you doing that change but not something we asked for. And so you need to be able to communicate that differently. One email saying we're going to do an upgrade in 2 weeks does not communicate to the audiences who want to know how does that directly or indirectly impact you.
Really? Man.
It doesn't. Not all the time. Not those stakeholders, not them few stakeholders who are very vocal, who come back on the emails and they do a reply all. They never just reply. It's always reply all.
Always reply all. Absolutely.
Always.
Okay. Well, panel, thank you very much for I think a very insightful hour plus there. There are actually a whole bunch more questions we could have gotten to, but we're going to cut it off here. I'll switch over now to our Jamboard for the retrospective. And Elizabeth, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Thank you, Stephen. Let's do a sound check. Can you hear me okay, Stephen?
Yep, sure can.
All righty. So first, thanks everyone who's participating and contributing. Let me first introduce myself real quick. I'm Elizabeth Connor. I work at VSP. I've been here since 2015 as a Scrum Master and a business analyst. Prior to that, I was in private companies and just a little human interest way back before VITA existed. There was DIT, the Department of Information Technology. And I actually was a terminal operator and hung round reels of tape way back then. So I've been in IT for a long time in many different roles. To get us oriented back to our Jamboard, we had great discussion and presentations today. And in an Agile world, the retro is our way of is at least one way of change management. So just reminding everyone that taking into account what we have heard today, you all are the stakeholders, the users, the one that it matters that this conference is a success and continues to be a success. So this is an opportunity for folks to say things that they think can improve our conference, our seminars, things to keep doing, to keep it up. So with that, and we've got our link on the chat, I see. So people feel free to keep adding. Right now, I'm just going to start. We're time boxed. We won't go past our noon time limit. Looking at what we've got so far on the first slide, these are the treats, the good things. And I'm just going to summarize as I read from top to bottom, left to right. And I will add, people should feel free if you want to speak up, if you prefer not to write, but just speak up. That's okay too. So let's see, the TED Talk, I call it TED Talk at the beginning, is good to get us warmed up for the conference. People, we've got comments about how good it is to be reminded about change management, and it needs to be planned, and it needs to occur iteratively. It was great to hear the overview of change management tools with assessment of pros and cons. And I would second that I actually did not realize there were that many out there. I'd heard of some of them, but not all of those. So Ted did a great job presenting those. Some kudos to Ted. Someone liked the comment, you can't get to Disney World if you don't know you're in Richmond. I thought that was great. Appreciation for the on-screen timer during breaks. So those little technology tidbits can help us. Folks did enjoy using the meeting polls, a good number of them. People enjoyed the questions and the Jamboard. We apologize ahead of time. The planning team did realize that a lot of people were shifting to Microsoft Teams, etc., and some attendees aren't in the overall beta access. So still working through a little bit of those adjustments to get everybody access to a single spot like a whiteboard or a Jamboard. So we'll continue to improve on that. Okay, we had a great discussion. I love the panel discussion and the questions written out on the slides. So kudos to those, having the panels share their perspective and have the content actually written so we could read it as we went along. There's a plus to the great conversation about tax, observing about ensuring communications reach vocal stakeholders. And that is a great reminder. I have another comment about enjoying the panel discussion and their perspectives. All right, and the last one I see is enjoying the interaction between the panelists. Wish there was more of that. So perhaps we need to have more discussions in our conferences going forward. All right, with that, I'll take a moment, and does anyone have anything they feel like they want to specifically share verbally? All righty. Stephen, if you would advance, we will.
I have a question I would like to throw out there, if it's the right time to the group. I'm embarrassed to say that we're at a very infantile stage in this, and at the beginning of this conference, the first thing Ted talked about was defining change management. And my organization actually uses that phrase, and it has nothing to do with what we're talking about right here. So I feel like that's how do you start that process? How do I get that process going to where I can even use a terminology like this and say, this is something we need to address? I need to first even agree on the term and have an understanding in my organization of what it is we're talking about.
Thanks, James. That's a fine question. I think I will actually ask Ted to spend a few minutes. Could you help us out there? Your thoughts? And Ted, you're on mute.
There we go. Yep. So my experience has been that absent finding either a highly influential individual that you can partner with or some sort of an executive champion who has in a role, executive role, senior manager role, who has passion for this, it's really, really hard. However, change management can be deployed at any level of an organization. And if your problem is that we don't even understand the terminology, then there are ways that you can set up lunch and learns where you on your own just start sharing in a half-hour session with people that are interested. I've done that before in a government agency I worked with as I was on a contract to try to fix the IRS. Obviously, I wasn't successful, but we had a huge awareness problem there also around change management. So for the first month, every week, we just had half-hour lunch and learns where we increased the audience by delivering something that we discovered really there was a hunger for. And we started with those that we were immediately in contact with, and we asked them to promote it through word of mouth. And we started a hunger at the level of the process performers and their immediate supervisors, which then led us to get an audience with some of the more influential people. However, like I say, you can do it. It's tough. You got to be very innovative. You generally have to sacrifice your own time to be the disciple and promote the vision and the language. But you're absolutely right. Terminology being aligned and clearly understood is a fundamental in the awareness stage of all of this. I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, Ted, I think I'd like to add just a little bit to that, and that is if the phrase itself, change management, is already claimed, already means something else in your agency, then I'd suggest calling this thing something new. I mean, it is, project communication and training, or it's ADCAR. I mean, the last company I was with, we didn't talk about change management. We talked about we do ADCAR. So if the phrase is already claimed by something else going on, and I would guess it's probably change control or something like that, but whatever it is, then if you need a different label, come up with a different label and introduce the methods here as a way to move your own project methodology forward.
Yeah, just to pile on there, Stephen, in the industry, the work that I do, figuring out where Richmond is so we can get to Disney World, that whole first piece is called business process management. Well, that doesn't mean anything to the people that I'm working with here. So I just rebranded it as being well managed, and click, people are getting that. That makes sense. So yeah, very good point there, Stephen.
James, I hope that helped. Thanks,
Thank you.
Stephen, and for Ted, and good question. All right, back to our retro. Stephen, if you'd slide one more over, and I think we'll look at the next few minutes, we'll look at areas where we have some opportunities. So again, let's see, the survey was interesting, but some bugs in the way it was handled. So we will work on that. And for the survey, in order to submit the questions early, I needed to put NA on the latter questions. Okay, all about the survey. So we'll try to fine tune.
Yeah, I own that. There was new technology for me and lessons learned. Very good.
Yeah, no problem. We could always change things we got to learn. All right, next we have need access to the slides because some slides were reviewed very quickly. And so I believe, and Stephen can correct me, but I believe we will have links to our slides out in some world, Google, someplace or another. You can certainly reach out to that email on the invite and we can get to you.
Yeah, we'll publish the contents of the conference in a shared Google Drive for anyone that wants to get to them.
Great. All right. When showing an interesting, informative video before the conference, advise attendees in advance. So it makes sense. If you
Interesting. So that's me. And we've done this for every conference. I've always played a video for 12 or 14 minutes before the conference starts. And I always, find a video, and I just go to searching on YouTube, find a video that's related to the topic for the morning. I do that so that when people join the conference early, they're not staring at a blank screen or listening to dead air. So I'm interested to hear that you'd like to know that that's happening. It is happening. It happens at about a quarter till the conference starts. Every conference we're playing a video of some sort. It's really to give you something to watch if you join early, so that you're not having to amuse yourself for that few minutes.
Thanks, Stephen. And I would add I have found them very insightful and worth drawing people in early to get them. That's a good tease to get folks into the conference early. So we want to keep that up.
And also, there's always the last slide for every conference. There's a list of resources, and the video that was shown is always the last line on that resource slide. So you can get to it if you want to go back and watch it again later.
Good point. All right. Another comment we have here is the polling function used at the onset by Stephen was more functional than the survey. So I think we're saying pollings versus surveys, and we will work on that. So does anyone have any comments they'd like to add that weren't on our Jamboard? Either things to keep going with, things to try to improve? I will add that we're always looking for, I'd say the planning committee is always open to suggestions for topics and upcoming themes for the conference. So feel free to reach out to us and share those thoughts.
Okay, well, Elizabeth, thanks very much for helping us through that little bit here at the end of the morning. And we will wrap up. Just a few closing comments here for you. Let me thank everyone. Thanks again to everyone for spending the morning with us. Believe me, we do not underestimate the investment that you and your agency are making by your being with us for 3 hours. And we really appreciate your being there. Also want to give my heartfelt thanks to the members of the CAAC planning team. Without this group, these events would not happen. And if you'd like to take a more active role in upcoming conferences, then the CAAC planning team is always looking for new members. Just drop us a line at caac@vsp.virginia.gov. I'll be glad to talk with you. So thanks again, folks. We will see you in February with CAAC 9. And that will wrap up the morning.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Yes, happy Halloween, everybody.